Yeah, thank you guys for leading in some worship and some praise. We're back to our study in Revelation chapter 6 tonight. I know I'm not going as fast as anyone wants me to go, and I'm sorry, but I do know that we are laying a foundation which will really help us in the future. It's a secure foundation that will help us make sure that we're reading correctly and studying correctly. And the other thing about eschatology, which is one of the disciplines of theology, theology can study the doctrine of God, the Son, the Holy Spirit, man, sin, redemption, the world, the devil, angels. Those are all different subcategories and subtopics in theology, and the way that you study those and know those correctly, and the way that you can know that you know them correctly, is if in your study you have been able to logically put the passages and the thoughts and ideas together. Now, I know that the logic of Mary may be different than the logic of Martha, but we all have a pretty good sense of what makes sense. When you come to eschatology, which is the last thing that you would study in theology, and it simply comes from two Greek words that have to do with last. Eschaton is last things, last words, the end times. You not only have to put things together logically, they have to make sense. Like, you can't have the tribulation happen after the millennium. It doesn't work that way. And you can't have the eternal state happen before the rapture. It doesn't happen that way. So there are certain things, but the thing with eschatology is it not only has to make sense logically, but it has to make sense chronologically. So you have an extra burden whenever you're trying to study eschatology and try to study it right. You've got to put things together logically where, that just makes good sense. And that's what we're trying to do here in our study of Revelation. But you also have to make sure that it works out chronologically as well. So the good news for tonight, even though I know I'm going more slowly than everyone would wish, the good news is we're going to finish the first horse and the second horse and their riders tonight. So you watch and see. Last time we really took a little bit of time necessary, which we don't ever have to do again with Zechariah's two visions, but with Zechariah chapter 1 and chapter 6. He has a series of eight visions on this one night. John's revelation, or it is a vision that he has received of these colored horses, is the third of three in the Bible. It's the third of three visions of colored horses. So as soon as we realize that, what does that tell us? It tells us that we probably need to go look at those first two. Surely the first two are going to help interpret this third and final one. And that's what we did. The warning that I gave you was twofold, and that is to be sure we don't try to make everything in one of these passages match everything in one of the others, unless it's just obvious that it does. But as soon as we start reading them, we see right away that's not going to work. The colors are different. The order of the colors is different. Some of the colors in the second passage, Zechariah chapter 6, just pass off the scene. The first chariot is a red one. And then when he goes and talks to the interpreting angel and said, what does this mean? Then the interpreting angel talks about the black ones and the white ones, that they went to the north country and quieted my spirit, and those bay strong ones went to the south, and then he doesn't tell us what the result of that is. We say, what happened to the red ones? So you see what I'm saying? It would be nice if we could just put all that we know from the first, the second, and the third vision of colored horses and just connect them all. It'd be nice to do that, but that's not going to work. The other extreme to avoid, I said, is just say, well, it's just pure coincidence. I think we would all be too smart to say that's pure coincidence. The New Testament writers, it's very interesting how they use the Old Testament. And they don't always use it in the same way that another New Testament writer does. For instance, I'm just thinking of a verse in Hosea where Hosea is talking about God's relationship with the nation of Israel. And he says in Hosea 11:1, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and I called my son out of Egypt. Now, Matthew uses that and applies it to Jesus, but when Hosea is talking about it, Hosea is obviously looking at the infancy stage of the nation of Israel. When they weren't even a nation, they were just the descendants of Jacob, the 12 sons and the 70 souls that went down to Egypt and then multiplied. When Israel was a child, I loved him. That was in his infant stage. And then I called my son out of Egypt. That's the Exodus. Matthew quotes that as a reference, or he applies it to the return of Mary and Joseph and Jesus from Egypt back to Palestine whenever the angel alerted them to the fact that the one seeking your life, he's dead, so now you can come back. So it's interesting how the New Testament writers use the Old Testament, and they don't always use it the same way. Many times they use it in a very unusual way, in some kind of typological way. So I'm saying that just to say, remember, as we're reading these four colored horses here in John's vision, we just have to be careful how we go back and interpret Zechariah. And so basically here's what we saw, that the horses are military figures. They're obviously sent out in some kind of battle, judgment, war, something. I mean, that would be something that we would understand from all three passages to begin with, that the writers are sent out in some kind of judgment. Now, the colors may be different. They are. The order may be different. They are. The writers may be different. They are. In Zechariah's first vision, in chapter 1 of his book, we saw they were sent out on a scouting mission. And then in chapter 6, in the 8th vision, they were sent out to do something about the scouting mission. And I said, when I come to studying what John says in chapter 6, there's no scouting mission to see what's going on in the earth, because there are plenty of other teachings in the Bible that tell us that when we get to the days preceding the day of the Lord, we're going to have a very wicked earth. Talks about, as in the days of Noah, as in the days of Lot, those were wicked times. So we already know we don't need a scouting trip. We don't need a reconnaissance mission. We know what the earth looks like. We also saw that contrary to what Zechariah's horses were doing, these are sent out in much more universal scope. Zechariah's horses were sent out just in relation to those Gentile nations and powers that had negatively affected Israel. And remember, whenever those first horses go out, they come back and they say what? Everything's quiet and everything's still. We're in the time of the Persian Empire where they've already defeated Babylon. Greece, that they will have to fight later, is 100 years in the future. There are no skirmishes or no wildfires they have to put out. We're in a very quiet and peaceful time, and I showed you last week how Malach Yahweh, the angel of the Lord, interceded to God on behalf of Israel and Jerusalem, saying, why is it that the nations out there are so peaceful and comfortable? And look at your people Israel in these desperate post-exilic conditions. So we have a different situation. The horses in Zechariah are very limited. The ones here in Revelation are much more far-flung. Another thing we see is the colors of the horses, which we'll be looking at more tonight when we get to this second horse, in John's account are significant. They are obviously significant. Another point in passing, some things I say, and I have to take for granted that we already know some stuff. I can't say everything in one paragraph or one sentence. I haven't proven some of this stuff yet. I'm just saying the colors are going to be significant. You say, well, I don't see that yet. Well, you will. Think white. We're going to talk about what that means. Red. We're going to talk about what that means. And then it goes to black. You wouldn't just know from the color, but when you're given the color and also the mission or the effect of that horse and its rider, then you can see that the level of judgment is increasing. It's not stable and it's not decreasing, it's actually increasing. So with the white, as we'll see here in a moment, it's basically symbolizing victory. That the white horse has accomplished what it was meant to accomplish, and we have victory. When we come to the red, that's the color of bloodshed. And what do we see? That rider was to take peace from the earth and that they should kill one another. And then the black horse is representing what? All kinds of economic and food problems and shortages. And then that pale green or pale yellow fourth horse, what is that? Well, we're told his name. See, when you're given one name, that can kind of help you understand what's going on. His name is Death, and the mission of that horse is to kill a quarter of the earth's population. And so we have the deathly pale color of the horse. And then the one last thing that I had said before is that the powers riding these horses are not so much, they're really not intended in our minds to be an individual. They are the authority, they are the power, they are the control that is sent forth to do whatever each of these horses is described as doing. And we see that they are not friendly. They're not friendly fellows at all. You don't see anything friendly happening here. See, that's one of the misinterpretations we saw last time of the white horse and the supposed or alleged rider on it. These aren't friendly fellows. These are hostile forces. And you can tell working your way backwards, even if you don't know what the white horse is. Start with the pale horse and work your way backwards. And what do you have but hostile forces with judgments happening on the earth? We went and looked at one great verse in Psalms 79, verse 48 last time. And that's the last of the plagues. Not all the plagues are discussed in that chapter. I think 6 or 7 of them are. But the ultimate one is that final one, when the death of the firstborn, the flocks, the herds, the people, the cats, the dogs, we don't know if there was any limit on it, but the firstborn of at least the people and the flocks and herds were killed. The firstborn were killed. And who did that? Well, it says in Exodus, the destroyer. Well, who is that? And see, the inspired writer of Psalms gives us a little more. And he said, God poured out the fierceness of his anger and wrath. I think he uses 4 words, and indignation and trouble on them by sending malevolent forces in their midst. And it's actually a good translation in the King James. He sent evil angels. And that was a manifestation of the pouring out of his wrath, his indignation, his trouble, his displeasure with the nation of Egypt for holding his people in bondage. So I'm saying that the riders on these horses are just as evil. The rider on the white horse, he's unnamed, he's unknown. The actual rider, he's unnamed, unknown, he's immaterial. I said last time, it's one of the strangest twists in interpreting Revelation, how and why everyone got so sidetracked on trying to identify who this rider is. It's immaterial to the vision. The first guess was it's Christ spreading the gospel. I actually read another commentary this week by a friend of mine. He didn't say the rider was Christ, but he still said the mission was to spread the gospel. But that is totally out of sync with what's going on here. And I know verses, this gospel of the kingdom must first be preached in all the world, then the end will come, Matthew 24. I know there's verses, but that doesn't fit this context and this timeline. It's simply out of order chronologically. And the other guess was, it's not Christ, it is the Antichrist. And he's bringing false peace. This is the dominant view if you jump on YouTube or turn on the television set and listen to prophecy preachers. This is a primary view that you will hear because this is a dispensational view. It arose in 1866 in Europe, and somehow made its way over here with all of Scofield's stuff and Darby's stuff and the Scofield Reference Bible, made it over to this country. Billy Graham was a big proponent of it. And then a lot of your prophecy preachers since then have said this is the Antichrist. And remember, one of their big points was he doesn't have any arrows. He just has a bow. And see, if you don't know what's going on out there in prophecy preaching, you might not even understand, well, where would they have even come up with that? Where they've come up with that is that when Antichrist comes on the scene, there are other passages, not here, but there are other ones that seem to indicate that he will come by means of flattery and oratory rather than by bloodshed and war. And so if that's true, then, and they know he's going to come at some point early in the tribulation, then they've made a connection between that and this passage. And they said that, well, he's got a bow, but he doesn't have any arrows. And so this is him spreading his gospel of false peace. But I don't think that this is Antichrist in either a warring mode or a peaceful mode. And I can say more about that when we get a little further along.
And so the first seal is opened, a white horse appears, and there is a rider on this white horse. And so the question becomes, who exactly is the rider on this white horse? Don't think it is Jesus. Jesus does not come until chapter 19. The one who is riding on this white horse had a bow, it tells us in verse 2, but notice no arrows. The bow was a symbol of peace. Arrows was a symbol of war. And so what it's telling us is this one who is coming on the white horse is coming under the guise of peace, but will actually be bringing war. The arrows are missing, so it's hidden for now. But he's going to come as a message given to him, and he went out conquering, it says there, and to conquer. And so the white horse is ridden by none other than the Antichrist. This is the appearance of the Antichrist. The Antichrist will come during the tribulation period.
While we're on the subject of the bow, we didn't even get to talk about the bow. If you'll flip back, we're not going to spend much time. We're going to hurriedly look at about 3 passages in the Old Testament. First of all, if you'd go to the end of Jeremiah, chapter 49, verses 34 through 49. Don't we know that the book of Revelation is squarely and firmly based on the Old Testament? So whenever it uses some figure or image, one place that would be smart to at least start to look to see what we could find would be the Old Testament. It might not work 100% of the time in tracing a figure or a symbol from Revelation to the Old, but I guarantee it'll work the majority of the time. So what is a bow? That's what I'm asking. You know, he has a bow. Now, it doesn't say he has arrows. I argued last time, nobody carries nobody carries a bow without arrows. We would assume he has arrows. We would have to be told if he doesn't. Jeremiah 49:34. Normally I try to give you the context of passages, but we're not even going to take the time to do that. We're just going to read it. The word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet against Elam. And I'm always tempted to tell you all the background, but let's just read the passage. In the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. This was the last of the puppet kings before the city fell. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam. What do you think that means? It's poetic, literature, writing, terminology, but it's obvious to anybody reading. If you're going to break the bow of Elam, actually it goes on to say, the chief of their might, I'm going to break their military ability as a people or as a nation. If you break the bow, I broke their weapons, they're kaput. They're going to be easy, they're going to be toast for somebody to take over. That's what breaking the bow means. So the bow is a weapon. It's a weapon of military conquest. Verse 36, and upon Elam will I bring the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds, and there shall be no nation whither the outcast of Elam shall not come. For I will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, and before them that seek their life, and I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, saith the Lord. Now he's saying all of this after saying, I'm going to break their bow. I'm going to bring them down to their knees. And I will send my sword after them until I have consumed them. And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, saith the Lord. So when he says, I'm going to set my throne, he doesn't really mean he's going to put his throne. His throne's always going to be in Mount Zion. But when he says, I'll set my throne, and he goes on to say, I'll destroy from thence the king and princes, saith the Lord. In other words, I will be in control of that nation. My rule and my authority will be there. I will set my throne there instead of the kings and princes of the Elamites. And then what's really interesting is look at verse 39. And it'll come to pass in the last days, the latter days. That's the time we're talking about in the book of Revelation. That I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. Whole nother subject. But there's going to be a restoration of these people that he has just predicted their downfall. And you can find Elam on your map. It's on the other side of the sea that separates Saudi Arabia from the rest of the world to the east of it. Then if you'll jump over to Hosea 1:5, just one verse, read it quickly. It will come to pass at that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And then finally, we're going to look at the 46th Psalm, Psalm 46. Let me just say something which I probably said before, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. I know I say a lot and you don't remember or hear necessarily everything I say, but it is amazing how many passages you can find in Psalms that are talking about the tribulation or the millennium. And of course, you'll find even more in the prophets. And it doesn't mean that it could not have had some small application in the day of the psalmist or in the day of the prophet. But as you look at the context and then you look at the language being used, can't possibly just refer to that time, can't possibly refer in some places to that time at all, because the language is just way out there. It's just too expansive. So let's look at this 46th Psalm. God is my refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. That, by the way, is the verse from which Martin Luther got his great hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. It was based on that first verse. So as you're reading this, we're reading it together, but as you're reading it in your private time and private life, what are you thinking this means? Say, well, God is my refuge and strength, and absolutely he is. There is always that kind of application. If God was the refuge and strength of the psalmist, he is also ours as well. But it's going to go so much further than that. It's interesting how quickly people want to find out, how does this verse apply to me? Instead of, first of all, just reading it for what it says. I was thinking about, I'm getting off the subject, but do you remember in the end of Acts 8, Acts 7, whenever the Ethiopian eunuch was coming back, he'd gone to Jerusalem, he's on his way back to North Africa, and by some miracle, he has a scroll, or at least part of the prophet Isaiah, and he's reading that. And Philip comes alongside the chariot, and what does he ask him? Does he ask him, do you know what he asked him?
Philip said, understandest what thou readest? He said, how can I except someone teach me?
Philip asked him, what? How does this passage make you feel? Isn't that how everybody reads the Bible? How does that make you feel? How can you apply that to yourself? What's your takeaway of that? He said, do you understand what the text is saying? Right. That's the question that you're supposed to ask. Do you understand? And he doesn't say, well, I've got some feelings or some vibrations, or I got some ideas. He just said, no, I don't understand what it says. I don't understand what it means. So when we read, rather than see how does this apply to me, what is it actually saying? Then we're in a much better position to figure out if and where it applies to us. He said, therefore will not we fear, Though the earth be moved and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Now that could, if we didn't have anything else, that could just be poetic language, right? The psalmist could be saying that even when all the things around us that represent stability and sureness and a foundation and grounding, like my parents or my job or my health, poetically, it definitely could mean something like that. That when the things that represent stability around me are taken, then I'm going to cry out to God, or then I'm in trouble. It could definitely mean that. It could mean that here, but as we're going to read, it means so much more than that. It means what we're going to read in Revelation 6. The mountains really are going to be moved. They really are going to be carried into the midst of the sea. Verse 3, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled. That's really going to happen. Though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. Those are earthquakes, the swelling. That's really going to happen. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. We read that in Ezekiel 47. There is a river. We read that in Zechariah 14. Both of which passages are millennial passages talking about a river that is somehow flowing in, out of, connected to Jerusalem and to the temple. So the psalmist, see, how did the psalmist know these things? How did the prophets know anything? They didn't. The Holy Spirit came on them. They prophesied, or they prayed, or they interceded for the nation of Israel. And these are the very words of God, which were a revelation of things you could not have known otherwise. God is in the midst of her, and she shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged. The kingdoms were moved. The heathen raged, that sounds like Psalm 2 that we read a number of months ago. He uttered his voice. The earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. What desolations he hath made in the earth. The psalmist is talking about the tribulation period. And you can find scores of passages like this in the Old Testament, where if we're just reading devotionally, we might just see this as Hebrew poetry. And he's talking about all of the storms in our personal life and how God will be there with us and see us through them. And we can definitely apply it that way, but that's not what the passage is saying. Remember, we want to understand, first of all, what is the passage actually teaching us. Verse 9, he maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. When has that ever happened? Never. No, it hasn't happened. And it's not happening in Revelation 6 either, is it? No, that's the beginning of the wars that are going to lead to the end of the earth, when God will cause wars to cease until the end of the earth. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow. That was the phrase I was hunting in this chapter. He breaketh the bow. Cutteth the spear in sunder, burneth the chariot in fire. This is a very favorite and famous verse that we've all used in our life. Be still and know that I am God. That's going to happen in the tribulation period. I will be exalted among the heathen. God's not exalted among the heathen. The heathen mock God today. But one day he will be exalted among the heathen, and the knowledge of the Lord will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. And I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Okay, so back to Revelation 6. Hopefully we have established that the bow, according to its usage just throughout the Old Testament, has to do with military power. It's a symbol of war. And in all those Old Testament passages, when God said, I broke the bow, he rendered their military strength ineffective. But this individual has a bow that is not broken. And so whatever he does will be effective. So this whole business of there's no arrows mentioned, that's just silly. That's just really, really bad exegesis, really bad theology. That's just silly. That's very immature. When you go to the Old Testament, Did you notice that it never mentioned arrows in any of those 3 passages we just read? And most of them don't. It just says the bow. Well, he didn't have arrows. No, of course he did. So that should prove the point if you had any doubt in your mind up to this point. Let's come then to this first horse. I just want to ask you, based on this passage and nothing else, what do we know? What do we know? I'm going to give you 5 things that we know only from this passage. It doesn't mean that you can get a full understanding just from this passage, because at the same time, the Bible has a lot of other things to say, and some of us have things floating around in our brains that might relate to this. The first thing we know, I'm talking about verses 1 and 2, the first thing that we know about this situation is that this is the first rider. Say, what in the world does that mean? Again, you almost have to skip and read the second, third, and fourth horse. And what you see is that the problems are increasing. So I would say, just by knowing that this is the first horse, that whatever he represents is going to be relatively small in comparison with horses 2, 3, and 4. Okay? You follow me with that? That's just a logical deduction. We know the fourth one, 1/4 of the population of the earth is killed. If so, we have to kind of jump ahead in order to interpret the first horse. As soon as we jump ahead and we see times are getting worse, then that tells me that whatever this represents, which we're going to get to here in just a moment, but whatever this represents, it's going to be relatively small, probably relatively localized, because the next ones get worse and worse and they begin to expand in their scope. The second thing we know is that the horse is white. Let me put that with the third thing, that the rider has a crown. So white, other people have said, well, that's the white horse of Jesus in Revelation 19. No, it's not. I mean, it could be if we didn't have any other information, but no, it's not. People say, well, white, that represents the righteousness of the saints. Well, if it's a white robe, it does, but we're not talking about robes. We're talking about horses here. I think when you put the white with the crown was this, what I told you last week, was a Stephanos. Stephanos. Stephanos, which was a victor's wreath. It's like a garland, like you would weave some greenery together. It was typically given in the end of an athletic event like the Olympics. If you won, what were you given? You were given a crown. And it was called a victor's wreath. I think the white, which to me symbolizes victory, a victorious campaign, the white along with the Stephanos, or the victor's wreath, tell us that whatever this horse and rider are sent out to do is successful. And I'm saying it's got to involve some kind of war because he's got a bow with him. I'm saying some kind of war is involved because he has a bow, but whatever he is sent out to do, he is successful. His campaign, or their campaign, if it's plurality, his campaign is victorious. So he gets to ride the white horse of victory, and he gets the victor's wreath on his head, because in this quote-unquote athletic endeavor, this military campaign, he came out as the winner. He's been successful. He could not be stopped. The fourth thing that I see here just in our text with the bow is perhaps distance is involved versus the next one who has a sword, actually a great sword. You don't need a bow for hand-to-hand combat. You need a bow with arrows for some distant involvement. And I'm going to also throw one other point in here, which you'll just have to accept for the moment until we can get to a passage. But I'm going to make a surprising statement to you here that my suggestion is not only is this involving distance in some way or the other, but it is outside of Israel, or is away from the nation of Israel. So this is not Iran or Iraq or Egypt or Lebanon or Syria. There's nothing happening right there in the Middle East. And if you'll give me a few moments, we'll get to why I think that's this way. And then the fifth thing, which tells us really everything that we really need to know, and that's what his mission is. We've been talking so much about the riders, the color of the horses, and the accoutrements of the rider that I purposely refrained from talking about the mission, because the mission really tells us what's going on. It's just these other things are building blocks to get there. He went forth conquering and to conquer. Now, how you can get out of that Christ with the spread of the gospel, how you can get out of that Antichrist with false peace, neither one fits the context here. He went out conquering and to conquer. And that's a pretty good translation. It's, by the way, the same word. Do you remember when Christ was addressing the 7 churches in Asia Minor, and he would say, "To him that overcometh will I give such and such"? It's the same Greek word here. It's the word Nike, Nike, which can be translated overcome, get the victory, conquer, any of those words. So he went out overcoming and to overcome. But I think this is probably a better translation. He went out, and the word appears twice here, the same Nike root. He went out conquering and to conquer. Some translations or some people have understood this to say or to mean he went forth bent on or set on conquering. That's fine as well. But I think that we see 2 steps. He went out conquering, and he was successful, and to conquer, and so he conquered again. He went out and conquered someone somewhere that was successful, and so he continued to conquer. He went forth conquering and to conquer. He's not beaten. He's not derailed. He's not stopped. He wins whatever this campaign is. And I know the information here is brief. That was what we first started talking about this chapter over, the succinctness of everything that leaves us thirsting for more. I wish you would have given us a lot more information. But it's this compactness that makes it a little scary, because all you're seeing here is somebody's conquering somebody. We're not told who, and we don't know who, but somebody's winning. And somebody is not able to be stopped. He went forth conquering, and then he conquered again, and this is an ongoing event. Let me give you a comparison in my mind, because as we read the Bible, it's really difficult because we just see these things in just in this spiritual context, and it's hard to lift it out of the Bible and see it in real life. But this is what we're told in the Bible, but it's actually going to happen. These verses are actually going to happen. And so what we have to do with our mind is try to envision that. So go back to the Second World War. One of my favorite things to study, and if you know anything about it, the Second World War. So, and I'm talking about Adolf Hitler in Germany. Now, I know that he invaded Poland in the fall of 1939, and that's a close nation, but he ended up, and he successfully conquered Poland, and then he conquered France, and then he tried to attack England and Russia at the same time. But in that moment in time, could that have been, let me put it to you this way, because this is a picture I'm trying to give you. At that moment in time, all things being equal, could that have been the start of the tribulation?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it from just this verse, you would think this person has fulfilled the last part of this verse. They've conquered, and they're still trying to conquer. until you get to the end of the World War II and you realize it failed.
Yeah, so that was not the start of the
You
tribulation.
might say, oh man, maybe Germany is the white horse.
Yeah. I see that as just a good analogy for what that's going to look like whenever it happens. It's not going to be worldwide because the next horses are much further in their expanse. It's going to be something that's limited, but it is going to be the start of the tribulation. It's going to be the beginning to the end. It's going to be the start of something. So if you just put a little thought into what was going on with Hitler, he definitely was involved in some long range, although I know he also attacked bordering nations, neighboring countries. He also did that, but there was some distance involved. We don't know. I have no earthly idea what country. So you hate to even name a country. You hate to say Brazil or America or Canada or Italy because everyone will go, oh, so was it that? Nobody knows. But the horse, a rider and the horse, they have to represent a nation. One man can't go, a man doesn't own an army. Armies stand underneath a governmental control. So it has to be a nation. It has to be a government. No human being has an army that he employs and feeds and services and sends out. These have to be representing nations. Which nation is this, or what couple of nations? I don't know. Have no idea. But play with it in your mind. Could this be a situation like Germany, whether it's in Asia or Europe or South America or Africa or North America? Some nation or two is going to be the rider on the white horse. He's going to have a bow. He's going to go out bent on conquering, and that's going to be the beginning. And it's not going to affect a lot of people. It's not going to affect most people. And I've got another verse. Hold on. I've got another verse to tie into this. If this is all we have, there's not much you can say. You're pretty darn limited. But keep in mind that all of us have in our mind, the more we know the Bible, the more we have floating in our head. All of us have floating around in our mind this passage and that book and this chapter and that idea. And so whatever you end up with here in Revelation 6 in these horses, or any study of the Bible, whatever you end up with here has to square with everything else. But whatever you end up with here probably has to be informed by additional passages because we simply aren't given enough information here. Is that fair enough for horse number 1? Can we go to horse number 2? Let's do it.
What are the other passages, though?
I'm going to get to that when I get to this second horse, okay?
Okay.
So give me just a minute, and I'm going to get to that. Verses 3 and 4, and when it opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given unto him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword. We aren't given much information here. 2 verses per horse and rider, and we're supposed to come up with what does that mean. By the time I'm through with all this, judge everything I've said in light of what you know here and in light of what you know in the rest of the Bible, and then make up your own mind. I just want to make this one point, and then we're going to get on to this second horse. Remember back with the first horse, it said that a crown was given unto him. And 2 times with this third horse, something has been given. That is a catch phrase, if I could call it such, in the early part of Revelation with John and all of these things, to tell us that the events that are happening could not happen by the power of that nation or the power of that person alone. Something has been given to them, and he obviously means God. God has given this person, this nation, this group of nations, the ability and the power to do what they've done.
Question: Do these nations or powers? The next question is: did they realize in their minds that God has given them that?
Probably not. Probably not.
They think that it's on their own.
They do.
So the passage doesn't give us enough information to
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But I was going to I'll turn here a little later to a passage in Ezra, the very first chapter. Ezra 1:1 talks about when Cyrus, the Persian king, released the exiles and sent them back. He evidently had some kind of awareness of it, because he goes on to praise God and say, God has given me this position so I can send these people back. But most of your foreign kings, Nebuchadnezzar and whomever, no, they're not aware. Necessarily, they're not aware. Although I think of these other things as I'm saying that. A really interesting story with Alexander the Great, whenever he came into, and this is in the period between the Testaments, so we have nothing in the Bible to inform us. We have to go to Josephus for this. But he was just running rampant across the Middle East. As he was the leopard with 4 wings in Daniel's prophecy, conquering at the speed of light. Alexander the Great. He conquered the whole world from Greece to India in a matter of a couple of years, and then died in his early 30s. And why didn't he just overrun Jerusalem and the temple? It's because the priests came out. The priest had a vision or a dream that if he would go out in his robes and his attire and beseech this foreign leader from Greece, that he could prevent this utter destruction that would have happened to the temple. And according to Josephus, and according to the account from the days of the Maccabees, Alexander the Great said he had a dream. He had a dream of a man coming out with this exact kind of clothing on, and he said, you're the man. And as a result, he spared the whole city and spared the whole temple. So, to ask your question, what I gave you with the right hand, I took back with the left.
They only know if God allows them to know through a dream.
Yeah. But I would say for the most part, they probably are unaware. Nations are simply acting on their own prerogative with the goals that they have in mind. Yeah.
Not realizing that God is the ultimate puppet master behind the scenes.
And that's what we realize. So this second horse, it's red. What do we know about it? We know it's red, number 1. We know his mission is to take peace from the earth, number 2. We know the result of that is that people kill one another, number 3. And number 4, we know he has a great sword. Remember, you take what you're given, red horse, take peace from the earth, kill each other, great sword. You say, what do I get from that? What do I get from that in light of what I already know from the first horse and what we will learn from the third and fourth horse and from our other passages in Scripture? So the horse is red. We have less disagreement, thankfully, here. Why? Because the information is more explicit and it's more copious. We're given more than we're given with that darn first horse. Bare minimum with the white horse. Red, the color, as we can tell here in this context, describes the bloodshed of war. From the earth, that phrase here, to take peace from the earth, it was given to him to take peace from the earth, means these conflicts are more widespread. This would be my assumption, and I will give you another verse that I think can prove this here in a minute. But my assumption would be that because we're going to start small and grow, white horse has total victory in limited areas. He went forth conquering to conquer. Red horse now has power that's been given to him to take peace from the earth. I still don't believe that earth means every single nook and cranny in the earth, because then there would just be all out bloodshed and war everywhere. I don't think that's happening yet. Just because it says the earth doesn't mean every part of the earth. Remember, whenever Caesar Augustus sent out the enrollment that everyone be taxed and go back to their place, and that's what caused Joseph and Mary to end up in Bethlehem instead of up in Galilee. What does it say? He sent forth a decree that all the world, the whole earth, would be taxed. Well, they weren't taxed over here in North America or in South America.
From their perspective.
It's from their perspective, that general area there. So earth does not necessarily mean every country in the world. It just means that the conflicts are much more widespread. And see, I think the white horse seems to be more limited. with whatever nations are represented, and the red horse is going to be more widespread. So let's see if we can't picture in our mind what this would mean. What does it mean if the white horse, since these follow consecutively, if he goes out, let's pick a country, but don't hold me to any country. We just got to pick a country. Let's say France attacks England, and France attacks Norway, and France attacks, pick another country, and he is successful. France is successful. Whatever country represented by the white is successful. That means you've overthrown the government of that other country. Okay? You got to picture this in real life and not just in the Bible. It's going to really happen one day. Picture it in real time, in real life. So what happens, but you've upset the balance of power in that area. You've created some big time, heavy duty destabilization in that country, in that region, if it's several countries around there. That's exactly what has happened there by the white horse. The white horse has created this destabilization, this upsetting of the balance of power in that area. Now your borders are defenseless. Now a neighboring country, remember the great sword, that's hand-to-hand combat. A neighboring country could also invade and take what they want, or you could have civil war and strife within your own boundaries because your government has fallen to a foreign power. I think we have to picture in our mind, how is this going to transpire? We've got to have a nation or two fall under the power of the white horse. And then we've got to have destabilization happen for the red horse to come in. And now we've got boundary disputes. Now that the government has been upset in pick whatever your country, now you have these natural resources that are available. You have these munitions that are available. You have factories that are available. You have a labor force that is available. And so what's going to happen? People are going to start fighting each other. So when it says in this next phrase, to take peace from the earth, that they should kill one another. That word kill is a pretty strong word in Greek, and it means to slaughter or to butcher. It doesn't just mean you fired a weapon and somebody got killed intentionally or accidentally. It's a heavier word than that. It means to slaughter or to butcher.
Sound like the concentration camp type.
They didn't do that.
Well,
Like
you could
Israel right now, killing and slaughtering.
You could just have these border disputes happening. People in another country, like what has happened with Hamas in Israel. And that is, almost hand-to-hand combat. It's local, it's with a great sword. But it's going to be on a much wider scale than that. And it says twice here that it was given to this writer. Something was given. Power was given to him to take peace from the earth, and they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. Let me just give you, because I don't think I'm going to have time to read all these, although I really wanted to, passages that show this divine prerogative. God has the right to turn people against their neighbors. There's so many. This is just throughout the Old Testament. Judges 7:22, 1 Samuel 14:20. These are just totally amazing. 2 Chronicles 20:23, Ezekiel 38 and verse 21, Haggai 2 and verse 22, Isaiah 19 and verse 2, Zechariah 14:13. Every one of those shows the divine prerogative where God either naturally or supernaturally, by what the Old Testament calls a tumult, causes so much confusion that people began to kill one another. So could that be in a supernatural way in the tribulation period? It definitely could be. But it does not have to be that or restricted to that. because people are going to want what other people have, because we're going to enter into some horrific times in the earth's history and population, and it's going to end up almost having to be every man for himself. So let me just weave in here. No, because I'm running short on time, let's go look at the passage I really want to look at, and then we'll weave in next week. And that's Matthew 24. The Olivet Discourse is, there's so much here and so much to say, and the confusion over the Olivet Discourse is just over the top. And I can't even begin tonight to get into the reasons why. It basically has to do with when Jesus said, this generation will not pass away till all these things have been fulfilled. This geneal. It really has to do with that, but we have plenty of time in the future to discuss all that. Let's just try to stay with where I want to be in this passage with regard to Revelation 6, these first couple of, all of Revelation 6. But I'm turning here prematurely. I didn't want to turn here. I wanted to save this for later. But you have to have this for some of what I'm trying to say about Revelation 6. The discourse is given, interestingly enough, in all three of the synoptic gospels: Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. Doesn't read the same. The authors, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Matthew was an eyewitness to it. Mark and Luke got it from other sources. The authors do not have to tell us everything that they know or heard, and they don't. Matthew tells us some things that Mark doesn't say, and Matthew was there. Matthew heard every bit of the Sermon on the Mount, but he only gives us what the Holy Spirit inspired him to give us. And the same is true with Mark. Mark was not there, and Luke was not there. They have other oral or written sources from which they gather their material. And the sources from which that material came was probably more copious than what is written in Mark 13 and Luke 21. Again, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, they simply gave what the Holy Spirit wanted them to give. Now, they're not contradictions, but there is always extra material that one of the other gospel writers provides. So the point in turning to Matthew 24 is just to start in verse 3. And like I said, there is just so much I could say. I'll open it for questions after this and see if we can stay on track, though, with your questions. As he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be?" The big question is, what things? And I don't think people's answer to the what things is the correct answer. And that's what gets them off track. If you get off track in the very beginning of this discourse, you're probably going to be lost the rest of the way through. Like, I remember one time I had a minister friend, and he was a pastor of a church, and one of the elders, probably his right-hand man, but his good friend in the church, they had found the rapture in the middle of verse 15 of Matthew 24. In the very middle. I mean, they had this chapter so diced up and cut up, trying to figure out where do each of these events go. I mean, that's what we're working on, are we not? Revelation 6, 1-4. Where do those events right there fit? Well, no, the rapture does not fit in the middle of verse 13. But they had carefully, 15, the middle of 15, they had carefully divided it up and had got it right here in the middle of that verse. And that was just bizarre for me. Anyway, back to verse 3. Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world, or the eon, the end of the age? The world will continue, the globe will continue, but it will be a new age. But you can translate it either way, end of the world, end of the age. And they ask, what will be the sign of thy coming? And so what do we call all of these things that we read in Matthew 24? What do we call these? You know this phrase. We call them the signs of the times, right? I mean, that's what everybody calls all of these, because they said, What's going to be the sign of thy coming? And we would expect him to answer that, would we not? And so we would expect him to answer that with what? Signs of the times. Because they said, what is the sign of the times? And he said, I'm going to give you a lot of them. And so in verse 4, we read, and Jesus answered and said unto them, here's the first thing. Before he began giving them signs, he said, take heed that no man deceive you. Now, even if we didn't have the next verse, don't even read ahead yet. Even if we didn't have the next verse, what's the inference we could draw from that verse?
You're able to be deceived.
You're able to be deceived. And what's another inference? There's several inferences. People are going to try to deceive you. He said, take heed that no man deceive you. An inference we could draw from that is people are definitely going to try to deceive, and people are capable of being deceived if they don't know better. And verse 5 goes on to tell us, we don't have to infer, many will come and try to deceive you. Many will come in my name saying, I am Christ, and they will be very, very successful in their attempts. Right? It says they will deceive many. Remember, we're so familiar with the way the Bible reads, we just read it and don't even notice what it said. When he said they'll deceive many, we interpret that to mean these people will be extremely successful. They won't be deceiving a few, they will be deceiving many. Here are the verses I want to get to, and I'm not going to read all this, just these couple of verses. He's talking to the apostles, and he said, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Remember when I said a few moments ago that I know the white horse starts the tribulation, and I think it's limited, he, them, whoever those nations or that nation represented by the white horse is or are, that they are very successful in what they do, but that their area of conquest is limited. And then I also said, I think it's not anywhere near the nation of Israel. I don't think it's anywhere around where Israel is today. And that's how I would interpret verse 6. What I think we have in Matthew 24 is an inspired commentary on the book of Revelation, especially the early section, chapter 6, especially the early days of the tribulation period. Now, it's going to go on and give us some more. By the time we get to verse 15 of Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, we don't know anything about this until we go back to Daniel. Daniel says he'll make a covenant with the people for one period of sevens, and in the midst of that period of sevens, he will break the covenant, cause the oblation to cease, and blah, blah, blah. The rest of what Daniel 9:27 says. So that tells us that happens in the middle. That happens in the middle. And then then after that, he said, when you see that happen, then Jesus tells the people in Israel, here's what you should do and here's what you shouldn't do. Here's where you should go and here's where you shouldn't go. And he says in verse 21, then there will be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world of this time, no, nor ever shall be. This is the ultimate. This is it. There won't be a period after this period that will be greater than this. This is the greatest period. But back to verse 6, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. You'll hear about wars, but you're not affected by them. You will hear of wars, but you're not affected by them. I think this happens outside and away from Israel. That the people of God, and there will be the people of God in Israel. He is coming back to them. They will hear of wars. Truthfully, there are wars. But every time any war happens, what happens? There are all kind of rumors that, well, now this has happened and now they're invading. We don't know whether it's true or not. It's just a rumor until you have a satellite image or until you have something real. You're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. Don't even let those trouble you. I don't think that the people in Israel, that the nation of Israel will be troubled at this time. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. The end is still in the future. Now, let's go into verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Now we have the second horse of the apocalypse. Now we have the red horse. Now we no longer have this one entity gone out conquering and to conquer. Now we have more whole scale. It's widespread. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now, I'm going to stop there because that gets me through the red horse. But, in your own private time, I would encourage you to continue to read the rest of what Matthew 24 has and continue to read the rest of Revelation chapter 6.
I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul, rejoice. Take